Have you ever felt like the roles between you and your children have shifted? You spent years guiding them, teaching them, and sacrificing for them, only to realize one day that they no longer seem to respect you in the way they once did. It hurts, doesn't it? The frustration builds as you watch them dismiss your advice, ignore your feelings, or even treat you like a burden. But what if I told you that the solution to regaining their respect doesn't lie in arguments, anger, or resentment? What if there was a way to reclaim your place as a valued, respected figure in their lives without fighting for it? In this video, I'm going to share 6 powerful shifts you can make to regain the respect you deserve, not by demanding it, but by inspiring it through your actions. These are simple yet transformative changes that can completely alter the way your children see you. Stick around until the end, and you'll discover how to step into your power and earn back the respect you might have lost. Let's dive in. 1. Stop chasing their approval. Chasing your children's approval often comes from a deep love and a desire to see them happy. However, when we focus solely on pleasing our children, we can lose sight of our own value and inadvertently lose the respect we deserve. A parent's love for their children is unconditional, but this love can be a double-edged sword. When parents begin to prioritize their children's needs above their own in an endless pursuit of approval, they unintentionally send a message that their presence isn't as important as constantly making others happy. This leads to an imbalance, causing children to no longer recognize the worth of their parents. Sadly, when we place all our attention on trying to please our children, we often forget ourselves. Over time, children may take our sacrifices for granted, and we become a portrait of someone always willing to give, never asking for anything in return. A woman named Margaret had spent most of her life caring for her children, sacrificing everything to protect them. When she was younger, she was a strong, independent woman who believed family came first. But as she grew older, she began to feel that her children no longer respected her like they used to. Her advice was brushed aside, and her decisions were no longer valued. Margaret realized that throughout the years, she had always tried to please her children, rearranging her schedule to accommodate their needs, listening to their every request without ever saying no. These sacrifices weren't being appreciated as she had hoped. One day, Margaret decided to change. She stopped trying to please them. She no longer accepted being treated this way. Instead, she started living for herself. She rediscovered joy in activities she loved, like walking in the park, reading books, and meeting with friends. When she stopped sacrificing herself and began setting healthy boundaries, her children slowly began to notice. They no longer saw her as someone who was constantly available to serve them. Instead, they began to see her as a person with her own life, someone who commanded respect. The big lesson here is that stopping the pursuit of approval isn't a sign of failure or selfishness. In fact, it's an important step in regaining respect. When we begin to respect ourselves and set boundaries, we not only teach our children to value us, but we also show them the importance of self-respect and independence. So, how do we start? A simple yet powerful first step is saying no when necessary. Don't be afraid that saying no will hurt others. In fact, it will help reinforce your self-respect and take back control over your life. Living for yourself isn't just a way for you to find happiness, it's a way to regain the respect of those around you, especially your children. Remember, respect is not something that can be demanded, It's something you create by the way you live your life. When you start living confidently without needing approval from others, you'll find that respect will naturally come back to you. When you reflect on your relationship with your children, do you realize that you've sacrificed too much for their sake? Is it time for you to start living for yourself and setting healthy boundaries? Stopping the pursuit of approval helps you regain the respect that you deserve while also rediscovering yourself. It's not an easy journey, but it's essential for maintaining your independence and dignity in life. Remember, respect isn't something that can be forced, but it can be built from the strong decisions you make every day. To lead by example, don't argue. Arguing with your children when they disrespect you might seem like the natural response. After all, you've spent years guiding them, sacrificing for them, and offering wisdom, so why shouldn't they listen to you? However, the truth is, arguing rarely earns respect. It often leads to more frustration, misunderstandings, and resentment. When we argue to prove our point or demand respect through words alone, we often end up weakening our position. True respect is not gained through the force of arguments, it's earned through presence, composure, and the way we carry ourselves. When we argue, we're essentially lowering ourselves to a level of confrontation, which can cause us to lose the very dignity we're trying to protect. The key is to lead by example, showing through our actions, words, and reactions how respect should be given and received. Frank was a retired teacher who had spent his entire career teaching children. As a teacher, he was confident, articulate, and commanding. However, at home, things were different. His grown children, now adults, had started to dismiss his advice and belittle his opinions. They often interrupted him, laughed when he tried to correct them, and ignored his insights. At first, Frank tried to argue with them, thinking that if he could just explain his perspective enough times, they would eventually respect him. But after many unsuccessful arguments, Frank came to a realization. Arguing didn't work. Instead, it made him feel more frustrated and powerless, and his children only became more resistant. He decided to make a change. Instead of fighting for his right to be heard, he chose to respond differently. When his children interrupted him or dismissed his opinions, he would remain calm and composed. He didn't raise his voice or get defensive. Instead, he really listened without trying to convince them of his point. One day, when his son mocked one of his suggestions, Frank didn't react angrily. He simply stated, "I understand you don't agree, but I hope you can respect my point of view." His tone was calm, his words deliberate. And from that moment on, Frank noticed a shift. His children started to listen more attentively. They no longer saw him as someone they could easily dismiss. They began to realize that Frank wasn't desperate for their approval, he carried himself with dignity and wisdom, and they started respecting him for it. Frank's story shows us that respect isn't something that can be demanded through forceful arguments. It's something that is built through consistency, dignity, and leading by example. By choosing not to argue and instead responding with calm wisdom, Frank regained the respect of his children. His quiet strength became more powerful than any argument could have been. The lesson here is clear: when we stop trying to force others to respect us and instead show them respect through our actions, they begin to reciprocate. We don't need to argue or defend ourselves constantly. The way we hold ourselves, speak, and react to challenges sends a stronger message than words ever could. By remaining composed, calm, and dignified, we teach our children and others that respect is something to be earned through maturity and self-respect, not through shouting or demanding. Are there moments in your life where you find yourself arguing for respect, instead of letting your actions speak for themselves? How could you change your approach to lead by example and regain the respect you deserve? Arguing might feel like the easiest way to defend yourself, but it rarely leads to the respect we seek. By choosing to lead by example through calm, wise responses, and maintaining our dignity, we not only earn respect, but we also teach others how to respect us. Sometimes, the best way to regain respect is simply to stop fighting for it and let your presence speak for itself. 3. Withdraw emotional dependence. As parents age, they often become more dependent on their children for emotional support. After a lifetime of caring for their children, it's natural to want to feel needed and valued. However, when we rely too heavily on our children for emotional fulfillment, it can place an unfair burden on them and, ironically, make them less likely to treat us with respect. Emotional independence is a powerful concept that many of us overlook as we grow older. We may feel that our children are the ones who should provide us with emotional stability, love, and attention. While it's perfectly normal to desire these things, when we begin to rely on them too much, it can put pressure on the relationship. Our children may feel overwhelmed, and instead of feeling loved, they may begin to see us as a source of obligation rather than a source of joy. This dependence can also make us vulnerable to feelings of loneliness, resentment, or frustration when our children don't meet our emotional needs. It can create a dynamic where we feel we are always giving, but not receiving in return. This imbalance can ultimately erode the respect that once existed in the relationship. Helen was a kind-hearted mother who had spent her entire life devoted to her children. As her children grew older, they became busier with their own families and careers, and Helen found herself feeling more and more isolated. She would wait by the phone, hoping for a call from one of her children. When they didn't call, she would call them instead, reminding them how much she missed them, and how she wished they would visit more. Despite her constant efforts to reach out, her children's responses began to dwindle, and Helen felt more and more like a burden. One day, Helen had a breakthrough. She realized that her constant attempts to gain attention from her children were actually pushing them away. They began to see her calls as an obligation rather than something they looked forward to. So, Helen decided to make a change. Instead of waiting by the phone, she began focusing on her own happiness. She joined a book club, went out with friends, and began volunteering at a local community center. By doing this, she stopped relying on her children for emotional fulfillment. As a result, something unexpected happened. Her children started calling more. They began to see her as someone with a full, vibrant life, and they respected her more. Helen's story teaches us that emotional independence doesn't just benefit us, it benefits our relationships as well. When we stop relying on our children to fill the emotional voids in our lives, we give them space to love and respect us freely, without feeling burdened. By cultivating our own happiness and emotional well-being, we shift the dynamic in the relationship and teach our children that we are strong, independent individuals with lives of our own. The key is to stop waiting for others to fulfill our emotional needs and start looking inward. Pursue hobbies, build friendships, and focus on what makes you happy. When you do this, you will find that your children not only respect you more, but they will also start to look up to you as someone who is self-sufficient and emotionally stable. Have you ever felt that you were relying too heavily on your children for emotional support? How could you begin to build your own emotional independence and regain respect in your relationships? Emotional dependence can inadvertently weaken the relationship between parents and children. By focusing on our own emotional well-being and independence, we can foster a healthier, more respectful dynamic. When we stop relying on others to fulfill our emotional needs, we not only become stronger and more self-sufficient, but we also teach our children to respect us as individuals who have their own lives and purpose. 4. Set boundaries and enforce them. One of the most important yet often overlooked aspects of maintaining respect in relationships, especially with our children, is the establishment of clear and firm boundaries. As parents, we have spent much of our lives giving and sacrificing for our children, often putting their needs above our own. While this is a natural part of being a parent, it's equally important to realize that, as we grow older, we must also set limits to ensure our time, energy, and feelings are respected. Without boundaries, we risk being taken for granted and losing the respect we deserve. Setting boundaries isn't about being rigid or unkind, it's about teaching others how to treat us. When we don't set boundaries, we communicate that we are willing to accept any behavior, even if it's disrespectful. Children, especially adult children, need to understand that, while we love them and want to support them, we are not their servants or emotional punching bags. Setting healthy boundaries shows that we respect ourselves, and in turn, it encourages others to respect us as well. It can be difficult to set boundaries with those we love, especially with our children. We may fear rejection, conflict, or even hurting their feelings. However, the truth is that allowing disrespect to continue without addressing it only breeds more resentment and diminishes the quality of our relationship. Robert, a retired businessman, had spent his career managing a company with discipline and confidence. He was used to setting clear expectations and having his authority respected. But when it came to his adult children, he found it much harder to set boundaries. They often interrupted him while he spoke, dismissed his concerns, and criticized his lifestyle choices. Initially, Robert tolerated their behavior, telling himself that it wasn't worth the fight. However, over time, he realized that by staying silent, he was unknowingly teaching them that their disrespect was acceptable. One day, Robert decided to change. When his son interrupted him during a conversation, instead of letting it slide as he usually did, he calmly said, "You can speak when I'm done." When his daughter dismissed his opinion, he firmly but respectfully replied, "You don't have to agree with me, but I do expect you to respect me." And when they continued to push his limits, he made it clear, "If you cannot treat me with respect, I won't be spending time with you." At first, his children resisted, confused by his sudden change in behavior. But over time, they came to understand that Robert was not backing down. They saw that he valued himself enough to demand respect, and because of this, they started giving it to him. Robert's decision to set boundaries and enforce them brought his relationship with his children to a healthier, more respectful place. Robert's story teaches us that setting boundaries is not a form of rejection, but an act of self-respect. It's a way of protecting ourselves from further disrespect while also teaching our children how to interact with us in a way that honors our feelings. Boundaries are a fundamental part of any healthy relationship, whether with friends, family, or even ourselves. The key takeaway here is that boundaries are not a sign of weakness but a sign of strength. It may feel uncomfortable at first to set limits, especially with those we love, but over time, we will see that our children will respect us more for it. When we respect ourselves enough to enforce our boundaries, we teach others that we deserve the same respect in return. Are there areas in your relationship with your children where you've allowed disrespect to continue unchecked? How could you begin setting and enforcing boundaries to regain respect in those areas? Setting and enforcing boundaries is essential for maintaining healthy, respectful relationships. When we fail to set boundaries, we risk being taken for granted, and ultimately, losing the respect we deserve. By firmly and calmly establishing limits, we show that we value ourselves and our time. This not only protects our emotional well-being but also sets a strong example for our children, teaching them how to treat us with the respect we've earned. 5. Stop giving without appreciation. As parents, it's common to give our time, energy, and resources to our children without expecting anything in return. We often go out of our way to help them, hoping that our kindness will be appreciated and returned in some way. However, when our giving is not acknowledged or appreciated, it can lead to feelings of resentment and, eventually, a loss of respect. If we constantly give without receiving gratitude or recognition, our generosity can become taken for granted, and the respect we deserve can diminish. We all know that giving is an act of love, but there comes a point when giving without appreciation no longer feels like an act of kindness, it feels like an obligation. If our children come to expect our help without ever expressing gratitude, it can create an unhealthy dynamic. We may feel like we are doing everything for them, but they start to see it as something they are entitled to, rather than a gift. This feeling of being undervalued can cause a shift in the relationship. Instead of fostering mutual respect, it fosters resentment. We end up feeling unappreciated and taken for granted, which ultimately damages our relationship with our children. But there is a way to break this cycle, by teaching our children to appreciate what we give and to understand that our generosity is not unlimited. George, a father, had always been generous with his children. He helped them financially whenever they needed it, dropped everything to assist them, and rearranged his life to accommodate their needs. However, over time, George noticed a disturbing pattern. Instead of feeling grateful for his help, his children began to expect it. When he helped them, there was rarely a thank you. Instead, they just assumed that he would always be there, ready to provide whatever they needed. And when George finally needed help, his children were too busy to offer any support. One day, George decided to change his approach. He stopped overextending himself and began saying no when he needed to. He didn't offer help before it was requested, and he stopped rearranging his life at the expense of his own well-being. At first, his children were frustrated. They didn't understand why he was no longer always available to assist them. But over time, they realized something important. George's generosity was not an unlimited resource. It was a gift, not an entitlement. Slowly, they began to appreciate the time and energy he gave them, and they started to express their gratitude more openly. George's story teaches us an important lesson about the value of our time and energy. When we give too much without receiving appreciation, we inadvertently teach others that our efforts are not worth valuing. But when we set limits on our generosity and require acknowledgement, we create a healthier dynamic where our contributions are seen as valuable. This doesn't mean we stop giving altogether, but we stop giving blindly. We begin to recognize that our kindness deserves to be respected, and we make it clear that our time and energy are precious. The key takeaway here is that generosity should be a two-way street. When we stop giving without appreciation, we teach our children to value our time and efforts. This helps restore the balance in the relationship, fostering mutual respect and understanding. It's essential to set boundaries around our generosity and to make sure our efforts are acknowledged and appreciated. Have you ever felt that your giving has been taken for granted? How can you begin to establish healthier boundaries around your generosity to ensure that it is appreciated and respected? Giving without appreciation can lead to feelings of resentment and a loss of respect. By setting boundaries around our generosity and teaching our children to value and acknowledge our efforts, we restore balance to the relationship and regain the respect we deserve. Our time, energy, and kindness are valuable, and when we stop giving blindly, we create a healthier, more respectful dynamic in our family. Generosity should always be a gift, not an obligation, and it's essential to make sure that our children recognize and appreciate the value of what we give. 6. Build a life outside of them. One of the most powerful ways to regain your children's respect is to show them that your happiness and fulfillment do not depend solely on them. As parents, we often devote ourselves entirely to the lives of our children, making them the center of our world. While this is natural and can feel fulfilling, there comes a point when it can become detrimental to both us and our children. If we make our lives revolve entirely around our children, they may begin to see us as people with nothing else going on, which can lead to a lack of respect and a sense of suffocation in the relationship. It's easy to lose ourselves in the role of being a parent. When children are young, we are their everything. But as they grow older and become more independent, we must learn to adapt. If we don't cultivate our own life outside of our children, we risk becoming overly dependent on them for our emotional and social needs. This can make them feel burdened or, worse, trapped in a relationship where they feel responsible for our happiness. The key to maintaining respect and a healthy relationship with our children is to develop our own identity and purpose, separate from them. When we show them that we are capable of finding joy and fulfillment outside of our role as their parent, they will begin to see us as individuals with value beyond the family dynamic. This not only leads to more respect but also deepens the bond in a healthier way. Ilana was a widow in her late 70s who had spent much of her life devoted to her children. After her husband passed away, she poured all of her energy into her children's lives. She checked in on them constantly, gave unsolicited advice, and expected them to fill the emotional void left by her husband's passing. However, instead of drawing her children closer, her actions pushed them away. They began visiting her less often, and when they did visit, their conversations were brief, and they seemed distant. Ilana felt increasingly lonely and frustrated. One day, Ilana decided to make a change. She realized that she was relying too much on her children to provide her with emotional fulfillment. She decided to join a local book club and began volunteering at a community center. She started traveling with friends and reconnecting with her own passions. As Ilana built a life outside of her children, something remarkable happened. Her children began to reach out to her more. They saw her not as a lonely, dependent parent, but as an independent, fulfilled individual with her own sense of purpose. Her children started to admire her for the way she had rebuilt her life, and they respected her more. They no longer felt the pressure of being the center of her world, and instead, they began to look forward to spending time with her because she had her own life to share. Ilana's story highlights the power of building a life outside of our children. When we show them that our happiness isn't solely dependent on them, we shift the dynamic in a positive way. We give them space to be their own people, and in return, we gain their respect and admiration. The key takeaway is that children respect parents who are independent and have their own sense of purpose. When we invest in ourselves, whether it's through hobbies, friendships, or personal growth, we not only enrich our own lives but also create a stronger, healthier relationship with our children. By showing them that we can thrive independently, we teach them the importance of self-reliance and self-respect. Do you feel that your life revolves too much around your children? How could you start building a life outside of them that brings you joy and fulfillment? Building a life outside of our children is one of the most powerful ways to regain their respect. By cultivating our own interests, passions, and relationships, we show our children that we are whole individuals, not defined by our role as parents alone. This not only strengthens our own well-being but also deepens the respect and admiration our children have for us. When we live fulfilled, independent lives, we create a healthier, more balanced relationship with our children, allowing both parties to thrive. So, we've covered 6 powerful steps to regain the respect you deserve from your children. From stopping the chase for approval, leading by example, to setting boundaries and building an independent life, each shift helps you reclaim your power and the respect that's rightfully yours. Remember, respect isn't something that can be forced or demanded. It comes from how you carry yourself, from the self-respect and independence you maintain throughout your life. When you live with confidence and self-worth, your children will notice and, in time, will respect you for it. So, where will you start? Think about the small changes you can begin making today to rebuild respect in your relationships. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. You might just help someone else along the way. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss out on more valuable content like this. Thank you for watching, and I hope you find the respect and joy you deserve in your relationship with your children and loved ones. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.